The portal may be closed, but the fun's just begun. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Do me a quick favor, see that little button on the bottom of your screen, click subscribe, helps our channel grow, helps our audience grow, and frankly, I truly appreciate all your support. It's invaluable to me. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's show, we bring back a nationally recognized Fox Sports radio voice. You can hear him on over 600 stations nationwide, host of the Aaron Torres podcast, and former writer for Fox Sports and The Athletic. Aaron Torres. Aaron, as the deadline to enter the portal has passed, who has done the most damage in the portal so far?
Well, let's keep it to UConn. And I just tweeted this out. I don't know when this interview will run or if we're live or whatever. I think you can argue that UConn keeping 4 freshmen who really didn't play that much. Now, we all watched UConn Marquette. We know what Jalen Stewart did. We saw a solo ball with double figures against North Carolina. But we could talk about other schools, other teams. You know, Kansas had a great month. Obviously, Kentucky replacing an entire roster. Arkansas in the process of replacing an entire roster. But, you know, who is it? It's Trilly Donovan that says the best gets are the ones that you keep or whatever. And I think this is a testament to what Dan Hurley has built at the University of Connecticut, but not built from a championship perspective or whatever. But he always says, I'm honest with guys to a fault in the recruiting process, and I expect that to be reciprocated. Trust me, trust that I'm going to bring you along the way that I promise you that I will. And so I find it fascinating that we talk about this guy going here and that guy going there and that guy chasing a bag. I think one of the great recruiting wins of the offseason is UConn retaining Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart, the 2 other freshmen not named Steph Castle, because those are going to be building blocks of future hopeful Big East champions and hopeful national champions. And as we saw this year, it really starts a lot of times with the guys that you have in the program more than just who you bring from outside.
No, you're spot on. And that's in the other 2 not named Steph Castle are, of course, Jaden Ross and Yusef Singari, only losing Apostolos Romelu, who I've actually heard is going to look around if Alex Karaban doesn't come back. We'll talk about that later in the show. He could potentially come back as a kind of a roster ad because obviously he's very familiar with the program. So I think we'll know more about that today in media availability for Dan Hurley. This will be out later this afternoon as well. So I appreciate that sentiment because as Dan Hurley has said, and I'm wearing the shirt, UConn runs college basketball, right? You know,
I'm wearing my 99 national champion locker room tee. So forgive me.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, I mean, if we talk about, teams that have done well, right? Obviously, UConn retaining players is great. Getting Aiden Mahaney, Liam McNeely as a freshman. They have Ahmad Noel coming in, Isaiah Abraham, both top 60 recruits. Outside of how great the reload has been for UConn, who are the threats to their throne? Because I mean, let's face it, they're going to have a legitimate chance to do this three-peat. Who do you see as the next 2 or 3, maybe 4 teams that could potentially kind of wreck that opportunity for UConn?
Well, I think next year will be interesting because you see a team like Kansas who clearly Bill Self said, hey, listen, we've been planning for next year for a month when they ended up losing in the NCAA tournament. So his chips are all in the middle with the portal. Obviously Arkansas is going to have as good of a team as anybody by the time the season starts. 2 McDonald's All-Americans, John L. Davis, Jonas Adu, etc. I think Kentucky's going to be pretty good, but outside of a Kansas, I think it's a lot of teams that were there this year that maybe take another step. Listen, what was the toughest game in the UConn tournament run? Probably Alabama in the Final Four. Mm-hmm. They bring back Mark Sears. Grant Nelson has announced he's coming back. He's not going anywhere. Jaron Stevenson, who was very good for them, declared for the draft. I don't see him on draft boards. You never know what somebody's going to do, but I think they have a possibility of bringing back several high-end players from that team And we saw kind of how close they were this year. I said with Alabama this year, I said, I think they're a year ahead of schedule because it was a bunch of kind of mid-major up transfers like a Grant Nelson, young guys, etc. And I really thought they were building for 24, 25. And so again, we'll see how the draft process plays out for them. A team, a program that I frankly had kind of left for dead that really impressed me over the last 6 or so weeks of the season, Gonzaga. I mean, Gonzaga, last year, listen, the talent level wasn't what it was in their heyday about 4 or 5 years ago. Tommy Lloyd leaves. I think that plays a major impact. But I only bring it up because they're another program like a Yukon. They retained pretty much everybody, not like Yukon this offseason, but they retained everybody. They didn't recruit over anybody. It is, we believe in the guys that just got us to the Sweet 16. Now, can all ththese guys take the next step as a group? So the great thing is right now, and there is still some movement to be had in the portal, just because of, there's still some names out there and everything.
Yep.
But I don't see those unbeatable teams at the top of the sport. And so when you talk about a Yukon, you compare their roster with a Kansas, with a Bama, with a Duke, with all those freshmen, a Carolina with RJ Davis back. I think they really match up well with pretty much everybody going into next year.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and I'm really looking forward to, as you mentioned, the four freshmen now rising sophomores playing a bigger role. Obviously, Ada Mahaney was sold on being a part of something special and going for this potential dynasty, not to come in and be this savior. So I think that's also part of something that Dan Hurley has built, the culture of come be a part of this team, this aspect of, Duke likes to call himself the brotherhood, but I don't know if you can truly call it brotherhood when seven exits, people leave.
Yeah. Some brotherhood they got, but anyway, neither here nor there.
Yeah, neither here nor there. This isn't a hate on Duke show, but it's always nice to go in with a little bit.
Well, we can take a jab every now and then. We don't have to hate on them, but maybe a little poke every now and again.
No, I like that. A little jab here and there. We'll get into Aaron's way too early top 25 and more coming up after this. Let me tell you about a recent experience with buying tickets. Frustrating moments when you're trying to snag tickets for a Major League Baseball game. I sure have, whether it's uncertainty about seat quality, struggling to find last-minute tickets, or just finding any good deals. But here's the game changer. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. Seriously, this app makes getting tickets a breeze. Plus, the prices actually drop as Game Time approaches. It's like getting rewarded for procrastinating. I've been using Game Time for a while now, and let me tell you, it's life-altering. You can browse through upcoming MLB games and other hot events, snagging killer last-minute deals, and even double-check your views from a seat before you buy. And the best part, you get all-in pricing with no hidden fees at checkout. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, we're back with Aaron Torres. Aaron, if Alan, let's look at your way too early top 25. You said, I guess I really only had, and you mentioned them, and your rationalization for having Gonzaga at 2 is an interesting one to me. I think I have an issue with it because I feel like as you mentioned, these guys have to make a jump. And I'm not saying that Mark Few is not a great developer of talent, but why don't you explain to me why you consider them maybe ahead of, I think you have Alabama at 3 or 4. Is that correct? Just kind of explain your top 5 and your rationale behind it.
Yeah, let me pull up my top 25. I have it available at AaronTorresOnline.com. I just think, listen, and to me, when I do my top 25, I say, okay, who is the best team on paper right now in this moment? So we're talking May 2nd here, understanding that, I'm assuming Alex Karaban is back. I will obviously adjust if he's not. I assume Mark Sears is back at Alabama. I'll adjust even if he's not. But when you look at Gonzaga, a team that played really well, I think they're just going to hit the ground running next year. And so, and this is the age-old question about, experience versus upside, right? I mean, this probably isn't the year to poke at Purdue too much, but that's been Purdue's problem in the past is they return a bunch of guys. The upside isn't as high. They win a bunch of games in the regular season, but they struggle in March because they may have started here. I got to put in front of the camp. They might started here, but by the time they get to March, they're only here. Whereas a Duke or a Kentucky or whoever starts here, but they're so, I hope this all makes sense. And so
Sure.
I just bring it up because, do I think that if everything clicks for UConn, and by the way, we'll find out at the Garden in December, but if everything clicks for UConn, do I think that they have a higher upside than Gonzaga? Absolutely. I think you could say the same with Duke. I think you could say the same with Arkansas, who we just talked about. I think you could say the same with, whoever, fill in the blank team. But right now, it's like, I don't know how is Hassan Diarra the starting point guard at UConn? How does he adjust? If he's not the starting point guard, can Aiden Mahaney be a high major lead ball handler? What if it takes Liam McNeely a little bit longer? So that's how I go about the process. Everybody does it a little bit differently. And I don't think that because I have Gonzaga as my second best team right now on May 2nd, that means that, so for people who don't have it in front of you, I have Kansas number 1, Gonzaga number 2, Bama 3, UConn 4. Doesn't mean that I think because I have them on this date, May 2nd, that, it's Kansas versus Gonzaga for the championship and nobody even needs to bother playing the season. But I just like how all those pieces were playing late. And obviously I think there's a level for them to go up, especially knowing each other.
So you're saying we shouldn't etch that in stone. In other words, we're not putting that together. This is obviously that's why we call it a way too early top 25. I joked around with you. I said, yeah, my way too early top 25 is UConn and then everybody else. And who cares but listen, you also have a AaronTorres.com, which is a great platform. I'm on it all the time. Great content there. So listen, I am doing a UConn podcast. So I have a little bit more of a bias, even though I know you're in from that perspective.
No, and I would say too, and I think it's an interesting conversation, is I could be wrong, but I don't know anybody that had UConn as the number 1 team going into this season at this time last year. Now, I think I had him a little bit higher because I knew how good Donovan Clingan would be. I liked Cam Spencer, whatever. And I know I had him higher going into 22-23. I had them like 12 or 13. They weren't even ranked in the AP top 25. So I was 12 spots off, but relative to everybody else, I wasn't that bad. But I bring it all up because I sound like Jim Calhoun. I don't know if you ever have listened to him in an interview, but he'll just start talking. He says, I say it to say, I bring it up to say. So I bring it up to say that I have seen people this year that's just like, look, I looked at UConn's roster this time last year and I said, this team's better, that team's better, that team's better. This year, I'm not doing that. Until somebody knocks them off, I'm just putting them at number 1. And normally, I do think that's kind of a corny, cop-out kind of thing. I don't think it is right now with the way that Dan Hurley is running college basketball. So if you have them number 1, I have no problem. And I still think their upside is as high as anybody. If it all clicks, but obviously you're going to have just about everybody except everybody really in a new role next year. So maybe it'll take time, or maybe it'll be like this year. We just start beating everybody's brains in from day one, like you did this past season.
Yeah. I look at it almost through the college football perspective. Like when Alabama wins the national championship and they've won it a few times in a row, or Georgia, it's almost a certainty that they get ranked number 1 preseason.
That's different though. I'll cut you off there. And that's different because, and I know you love college football like I do. There's just such a talent gap with those teams that listen,
true.
Georgia didn't win the national championship this past year, but you put them on a neutral field with anybody, Alabama was favored against Michigan, or maybe it was like a 1-point game, whatever. So Georgia would have been favored against Michigan. The only point I'm trying to make is that even when Alabama loses 5 first-round draft picks, the totality of talent in that program, even still in the portal era, is so much bigger than most teams in the sport, where I do think college basketball, there's just such a disparity between, or there's not as much disparity, especially when you're losing high-end NBA caliber players like UConn is with a Donovan Clingan, Steph Castle, et cetera.
No, I don't disagree with you. I would. My only counter to that argument before we get into the last segment of the show is, I feel like right now the coaching disparity between Dan Hurley and his staff and the rest of the country is such a huge leap for UConn to kind of be ahead of all of the teams that you have, not just you, but others will have ranked in the preseason. Because, I mean, I know Bill Self is a Hall of Famer, but he brings in a pretty good roster every year, and he's got 2 titles, and Dan Hurley hasn't lost an NCAA tournament game in 2 years. So we I gotta give that tax, if you will,
Well,
that coaching tax.
and this is a nerd thing that only I can talk about on this show, as we discussed last time. But, I talked about keeping the 4 freshmen not named Steph Castle for their sophomore years, but the ability to keep, obviously Kamani and Luke Murray, that's as big about this as anything that, I don't want to say it's bigger than Dan Hurley himself, but I certainly think it plays a huge role where, you look at those guys, and I know Dan Hurley has said both Coach Young and Coach Murray are going to be head coaches someday. I'll say this too. I've noticed this because I've seen a lot of people like criticize, like, how are these guys not getting head coaching jobs? UConn being in the tournament so late every single year kind of helps UConn retain them, because now in this portal world, nobody wants to wait for a coach to finish a national championship run or a Final Four run to hire somebody. So listen, Dan Hurley doesn't like dealing with the portal, so he just keeps winning so he doesn't have to worry about it. I think it's also helping him retain his staff in March into early April, because schools just can't wait until April 4th for their coach to hit the ground running and putting together a roster. But keeping, as I said, Coach Young and Coach Murray, Coach Moore too, who obviously has a ton of experience in this sport, is as valuable as anything that Dan Hurley's done.
Yeah, and I'll throw one more thing in there before we get to the next segment, is Tom Moore's Twitter game, or X game, as all of them, is so phenomenal. His gifs or gifs, whichever way you want to pronounce it, I have to say, phenomenal. So
I'm a fan of the Luke Murray fist pump. It's so subtle.
Absolutely.
It's so to the point. I love everything about it. So gift game is strong. Social media is strong from the whole staff.
The social media game is very strong from UConn. So we'll leave it at that. We'll talk about Alex Karaban's future with Aaron Torres coming back after this. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that. But here is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments. There you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with your friends. Cool new places to travel with, to boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends with your smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton including their own unique mini games like digging for treasures or robot pachinko game. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. All right, we're back with Aaron Torres. Aaron, if Alex Karaban goes pro and sneaks into that first round or makes that decision to stay in the draft one way or the other, where do the Huskies turn? Do you feel as if they're going to trust Liam McNeely and Jalen Storr kind of as a combo, or are they going to try to bring in someone late from the transfer portal?
Yeah, I know I said to start one of the earlier parts of the interview or the conversation that I felt like there's still probably more good players in the portal than you think.
Absolutely.
But there's nobody that, listen, the guy had a down year this year and averaged 13 points per game in the Big East on a national champion, obviously 2-time national champion now. I that's the one thing I don't have an answer to. And I think, it's so many different things. It's the positional fit. It's the leadership fit. It's the statistical fit. And it's the skill fit. We think Jalen Stewart's going to get there one day, but can he step in and be a 13-point-a-game scorer next year? Maybe he can, but I don't know that I feel totally confident saying that. Will he hit 37% from three? Certainly don't feel confident saying that. So it's not a knock on the kid. I think he's going to get there, but Alex Karaban is really important. And I thought it was interesting. Hurley's done a lot of interviews this offseason. I forget who he said it to, but I think maybe it was Andy Katz on earlier this week where he said he said it's a very easy decision. If he's a first rounder, he's gone. If he's not, he's coming back. So I found that interesting because now, one, back end of the first round, the money, whatever, but two, there are guys that can make real money as second rounders as well. Now, I think Caraban's a little bit different, can obviously graduate next year, which he mentioned at the championship parade in Hartford a few Saturdays ago. So I think it's different, but that is the one question. I don't think, I think if you lose Alex Karaban in, April 12th, and he just says, I'm going the way that a Donovan Kling and a Steph Castle does, that makes it a little bit easier. I don't know that there's the obvious plug and play guy in the portal, or there will be a plug and play guy in the portal late May, early June, when that final decision will be made.
Yeah, I almost think they go a different direction if Alex does go and he kind of is very honest about that, and I'm sure he will be, that hey, I'm going whether I'm a first rounder or a second rounder, just kind of putting that out there. They may go get more help someplace else, because it's hard to, because like you said, it's hard to find that fit as a kind of a stretch small forward with all the things that he does, and just
way, how about third string center bodying Zach Edey in the biggest minutes of the season? But anyway, keep going. I'm so rude.
No, but that's fair. Is like, it's how do you find someone that can come in at 6'8" and guard someone 7'4" that outweighs you probably by 100 pounds? Sure. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to do. So if you got to trust that Liam McNeely is kind of like the Alex Karaban eventual replacement. Jalen Storr can step in and be the guy who they called upon in emergency situations last year. I think they maybe they go find another small forward or guard or another wing. I don't know. It's an international player that we don't know yet. So I think that could be something that you throw in the mix here. You have Hassan Diarra on your show quite frequently. How surprised were you that he came back? Were you surprised at all? Were you pretty confident that he was coming back? And what was your thoughts there?
Honestly, it was something, he and I, so for people who don't know, when you have these NCAA tournament sites, they have what's called an open locker room, which you can kind of go in and talk to anybody. Obviously, a Zach Edey, Donovan Klingon is going to have a bigger crowd than whoever, fill in the blank. And so you don't always get one-on-one time, but Hassan was great. He knows me a little bit through our interviews. And I would never say that I tried to get information out of him or I tried to probe him. But I tried to, kind of just be blunt, like just get a feel for it. And I even told him on my show, I said, if you want to announce on the show, let's make it happen and we'll make it a big thing and whatever. And I just think he's a low key guy. I mean, he obviously announced, I guess, through Store Central and the work that they do. And so am I surprised? I'm not. But there was a short amount of time. There was an amount of time where I thought, certainly that it's not guaranteed. And I think there was probably a time where I thought maybe this guy is going to go pro and just whatever. I mean, he's graduating from UConn this spring. He obviously came in with Tristan and with a lot of guys that won't be there anymore. And so did it make sense for him to just say, I'm going to start my professional career with my degree in hand, whatever? He's coming back, but I'll be honest, people were asking me nonstop. I had no real feel. I didn't want him to feel like I was pressuring him for some sort of information. I'm not the type of guy that if you tell me something, I'm going to rush to Twitter and put it out there. And so I just bring it up because I had no great feel, not surprised. But I do think there was a window there where I thought it might not happen, especially, by the way, the last interview that he did with me was the week after the national championship game. He said, yeah, we're going to have an announcement by the end of the week this week. And it was like 2 weeks past and he didn't say anything. So I was like, oh man, is there something going on here? But he obviously made his decision just a few days ago.
No, it's I'm glad he's back. I can wear my headband. I would have worn it anyway, but I got my headband Haas. Shout out to I think it's all 22 who does that. So appreciate that.
It would have been a relic of the past.
It would have been. All of everything you buy is basically a relic now. You keep winning national championships, and all of the 23 stuff is old.
Dude, I got my 5-time national championship sweatshirt. I gotta turn it into a dish towel now. It's just out of date. No, I'm kidding. I still wear it proudly. And it was funny. I was going to get something like Tristan Newton related. And then I was like, in a year when he's on like the Charlotte Hornets, should I just get a Tristan Newton like NBA jersey or whatever he ends up doing? He's one of my favorite Huskies of all time. I don't know. I don't want to make anybody else feel bad, but I love Tristan. So.
No, it's Tristan's so great. And obviously I'm in North Carolina, so I got a lot of love for him being an ECU guy. Well,
did you know anything about him before he got to UConn?
Yeah, a little bit, because I'm such a hoops head. Like if you come into my house, we have a 65-inch TV that's on the wall, but there's a 40-inch TV that's to the left that is adjacent. In case the kids are watching something, there's always a game on.
Sure.
So no matter what, so that's been going on for years before the Locked On UConn started. It's good to kind of pick up on some of these guys, and especially now with the portal, there's games on constantly.
I'll tell you, I started, this is the first year that I ever did this, is when I had a feeling, Chris Holtman is going to get fired, or he does get fired, or Juwan Howard is probably not going to come back. I actually started watching those teams a little bit more closely, because I'm like, a Terrace Reed is a perfect example of a guy that's like, oh, wow, I wouldn't, if Michigan was the 8th best team in the Big Ten, I wasn't going to watch them. But because they were the 14th or whatever number of teams they have, 14th best team in the Big Ten, I was like, I might have to get to know some of these players here. So I've changed my viewing habits a little bit because of it.
Absolutely. Before we go, I was going to mention Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now and available on the free Fire TV channels app, 24/7 streaming channel. Before we go, Aaron, why don't you let everyone know? I think everyone knows who you are, but tell everyone where they can find your stuff, where they can subscribe, promote as much as you like. Floor is yours.
First of all, before I go, I do want to, congratulate. It's not the right word, but I've seen the growth of your channel. Super happy for you personally. I don't know if I should share, but, going into the off season, we talked and I was like, dude, just go portal hard every day. You will not regret it. But I'm so happy to see the growth of your show. The more UConn coverage, the better. I come from the Calhoun Hurley tree, where I think people aren't talking about UConn enough. I got a chip on my shoulder. So congrats on the success of your show. And then obviously my show is the Aaron Torres podcast, as you said. We talked a lot about the UConn roster this week. I cover college sports on a national level. So, we're diving pretty deep into the Kentucky rebuild, the Arkansas rebuild, the top 25s, a lot of the high school recruiting stuff with the Liam McNeely types. Start ramping up back for football soon. But and then obviously I host on Fox Sports Radio on the weekends as well. And that's the best place to find me and do what I do. And I appreciate what you do, Mark, as well.
Well, I appreciate you always, Aaron, and thank you for the kind words. Yes, you were definitely one of the voices that talked about portal, as well as a couple of producers here at Locked On were like, yeah, you should probably follow that advice. So
there you go.
Listen, I appreciate everything you said, and thank you for coming on the show again and again. Open invitation. You're a UConn guy as well.
Thank you.
Love to have you on as we get closer to the season.
Let's hope there's no big news that we have to talk about this off season. I mean, when Caraban makes his decision, I'm happy to come back or whatever, or draft night, happy to come back. But hopefully there's no, nothing unexpected that happens over these next couple months. But man, I appreciate you having me as always.
Thanks again. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. For Aaron Torres, I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising, and as always, go Huskies.